What is that feeling like the first time you walk in a room like I just did today meeting you, but she's the Queen and you've got to now represent her and effectively defend her, haven't you?
Well, I was rather lucky because I had met her before on previous occasions. I'd met her in Jordan, I met her in China, and I met her in Australia. You know, not to have a long chat, but she knew who I was and I who knew she was, which I would do, wouldn't I? So it wasn't so much, I wasn't worried about it. And I've always been somebody who would talk to somebody on the same level while still respecting that they are my employer or they are more senior than I am. So there wasn't any sort of concern. And I think I displayed this when I went up to Balmoral.
I think it's less of a PR world in those days when you started as it is today, but nevertheless, the word has got to be trust, hasn't it? That she's got to trust you. How long was it before you felt like she trusted you?
It wasn't very long. When the head of state calls you by your given name, then you know that you're okay. And she started calling me Dickie fairly soon in. So I knew that I was okay. If it's Mr. Arbiter, or not even referring to you by name, then you've got a problem.
You were involved in so many scandals through those years that you were at the palace. Which one brings the hairs back up on the back of your neck and you wish you could either live again, do differently, or avoid?
Well, I was never actually involved in the scandals because they were actually created by the principals themselves. I mean, firstly, there's the Diana, Her True Story, the book by Andrew Morton, which she denied having given help to, but she did indirectly through an intermediary. There was the Prince of Wales's interview in which he confessed to having committed adultery while married to Diana, which he did actually, interestingly enough, sitting in the choir stalls at St George's Chapel, Windsor. And then there was Diana's panorama a year later, in which she said there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. So there were things that were created by them. The original Prince of Wales interview was supposed to be rather bland. It was going to be a sort of a bit of a biog of what a jolly fine fellow is, the sort of charitable work that he does, to coincide with the 25th anniversary of investiture. Somebody moved the goalposts and it became an hour and a half. It became confessional, and it was all wrong. And people remember it for his confession rather than for anything else. So they were things that of their making rather than my making. I suppose the one long-standing memory I have is really the funeral, the death and the funeral. We gave her a jolly good send-off. We did things right. We, and I say we being Buckingham Palace, there was no Downing Street interference. They wouldn't have been allowed to interfere anyway because they didn't know what to do. The only tick in the box that they did was that there'd be unlimited funds to do what we had to do. But that is it, and we did do a good job, and I think most people will agree to that.
2 questions on the back of that. I'll come to the second in a moment. On that specific point, there was, though, a point where the Queen was questioned about not being at Buckingham Palace, not saying anything. She then came back and did, and the whole world relaxed. Were you involved in that decision? Did you encourage her to, or did you initially at the beginning say, just hold off, wait for a moment?
Firstly, the Queen doesn't do things to order. She doesn't do things to an agenda. She does things when she feels that it is right to do. And if she had paid a tribute to Diana on the Monday, the day after she died, she would have been expected to do something else at the end of the week. And it was a conscious decision that A, she was going to come back at the end of the week in time for the funeral, and B, that she was going to pay tribute to Diana, but in her own way, in her own time. The fact is that Charles, Prince of Wales, and William and Harry came back the day before. You may remember that they walked around Kensington Gardens, absolute composure written all over their faces. There's a saying in royal circles, you don't wear private grief on a public sleeve. And they did a marvellous job, while all around them people were weeping and wailing. The next day the Queen came back to London, and she first of all went to look at the books of condolence, a walkabout afterwards. There was polite applause from mourners waiting to sign the books. She then went down to Buckingham Palace and did the same, did a walkabout in an enclosure, put flowers down for people, talked to mourners, and left to go back into the palace. And again, when she arrived and when she left, there was polite applause. Now, the media got it wrong. They were looking for a story. By Wednesday, there was no story to be had. Diana had died. The funeral arrangements were all out. The biographies of Diana, what she had done, were all out. They had to find something else. So they whipped up a public frenzy against the royal family. For the first time in her reign, the Queen put family before duty. They forgot, the media, that there was a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old grieving for the tragic loss of their mother in such public circumstances. And if it hadn't been for their grandparents, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did on the day of the funeral, and that's walk behind the gun carriage, absolutely dry-eyed and stoic. They couldn't have done it, but it was their grandparents, both the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, who put them into a position where psychologically they could do it. Psychologically they could do what they did in Kensington Gardens, to walk around when all around them people were weeping and wailing. These are two teenagers. What teenager can do that? It's a very hard thing to do, but they did it. And if it hadn't been for their grandparents, it would have been a very different story on the day of their funeral. And I think the great British public realised that it was their grandparents and it was their dad who had been up there with them to counsel them, to help them get through the first few days, to let them go off on the estate and do what they liked, when they liked and how they liked, that they were able to do what they did on the day of the funeral.
Aside from Diana being a mother and being someone's daughter and brother and having a grandmother and all the emotion involved, from a press officer's point of view, was she a thorn in your side?
Diana wasn't a thorn in anybody's side. She did do some things that didn't necessarily approve of, like helping Andrew Morton with his book indirectly by doing Panorama. She did ask advice about things that she had an idea to do, and if they were fine, I'd say, yeah, well, it could work, we'll make it work. Or if it was a loopy idea or had every possibility of not working, I'd say so. And if it was something that it wasn't going to work, and I said so, she wouldn't talk to me for a couple of weeks. And then she'd want something done, pick up the phone, Dickie, can you do X, Y, Z? And she'd giggle. I'd say, are we talking again? There'd be another giggle, and off we'd go again. So she wasn't a thorn in the side. There are, I suppose, the old courtiers, sort of the sort of military types, and the sort of old-fashioned courtiers probably thought she was a thorn in the side. But she did things differently. But when she did them, she got things done, and she brought attention. She brought attention to the fact that you couldn't get AIDS by shaking hands with somebody, which she did in 1985 or 86, I think it was, at the Middlesex Hospital. She brought attention to the fact that you can't catch leprosy by holding somebody's stump, which she did in Indonesia in 89. She brought attention to the dangers of landmines, which she did after she got separated. So she did a lot of good things, but thorn in the side, no. Did things differently. Some people liked the idea, other people didn't. Queen didn't have a problem with that, nor did the Prince Philip.
I've got infinite questions for you. We're never going to get to any of them. The question I've got to ask is the gentlemanly agreement between Her Majesty and the press officer. Should you be morally writing this book and talking to me now? I've got to ask that question.
Well, you're quite entitled to ask that question. And had I written it immediately after retiring from Buckingham Palace, I would have been not morally right, probably wrong, sort of rushing to print a spill-all. This is not a spill-all book. It is an autobiography. It is about me. It is about from the day I was born in September 1940 to the present day. The fact that 12 years of my life, 74 years, happened to be at Buckingham Palace, yes, you've got to include it, as I've included everything else. It is a reflective look back on my time there. It is, in some instances, setting the record straight. I did tell Buckingham Palace I was doing it 9 months ago. They did see the manuscript. The book is being published. That speaks volumes.
Absolutely. Your take then, as we sit here now, on that insight that you've gained, do you have sympathy for the royal family? I wouldn't personally want to be them. As glamorous as their life may be with private jets and huge palaces, it wouldn't be a life for me. What have you taken from their life and their lifestyle?
Well, firstly, let me dispel that myth that you've just expounded. They don't have private jets. They're not theirs. They are transported around either by the Royal Air Force, as are government ministers, or by chartered aircraft if they're going overseas, usually chartered from British Airways. So they don't have private jets. Palaces, well, anybody who's been around Buckingham Palace will see that it's not lavish, it's not glitzy, it's not glamorous, it's not the Hollywood type of palace that you would expect. In fact, there are millionaires living in more ostentatious ways than our members of the royal family. Would I want to be them? No, not particularly, because I'd like to lead a private life, which they can't. They're being sort of continually looked at by cameras, and this is great British public too, with their phone cameras. They're constantly being written about. Lifestyle, well, they have a pretty good lifestyle if they're left alone to enjoy it. It's a lifestyle that a lot of people have. They just happen to have it in slightly bigger houses and being able to afford it a little bit better than most people. But I don't think I would like that lifestyle. I'd like to be able to do what I like, how I like, when I like, without having a camera shoved up my nose to doing it.
Exactly. And then we look at the royal family today, who have never been more popular, really. I mean, they've never had a period of such longevity where it's good press, not bad press. But the boys, of course, are the future. Do you worry for them? Do you have concerns that they're, as you say, in this culture of celebrity and sort of becoming celebrities?
Both William and Harry are pretty adept at being able to mastermind what they want to do and what they don't want to do, what they want the media to cover and what they don't want the media to cover. And a good example of that was last year when Prince George was born. When William and Catherine came out with George, they went straight over to the media, they posed for pictures, they answered a few questions, and then they went back. And they're media managing themselves with help from the press office, but they're the ones that are in control. They were in control up in Anglesey when William was in the Air Force. They were left alone. They weren't left alone in France when Kate was photographed topless in a villa. That is unfortunate, but that's paparazzi. But the interesting outcome of that was that the pictures weren't published in the UK. So they're very much in control of their own destiny, as is Harry. Yes, he's done some silly things, stripped videos last year, but then he probably knew he was going to Afghanistan. He thought he'd have a rip-roaring time in case he didn't come back. Why not? Most people thought it rather endearing that he went that far. But no, both William and Harry are in control. They're not suggesting for a moment they're control freaks, but they are very much in control of what the press can have, what they can't have. And if they want, then they've got to play by the rules, their rules.
Right. If there were to be any royal member of the family here now, it'd probably be Prince Philip I'd want to interview the most. Is he as much fun in real life as he appears from time to time on camera?
Prince Philip doesn't suffer fools. He likes good conversation. He likes good company. And if you've got nothing to say, then he can't be bothered with you. He doesn't make small talk. There was a lot written about him years ago, that he was a philanderer, that he sort of chased after various women, which couldn't be further from the truth. He's a good sort of solid red-blooded heterosexual male, but he window shopped. He didn't buy.
Talking of which, I interviewed Max Clifford a few months ago before all the nonsense happened, and he wrote a book in which he talks about Diana and Hewitt, and he claims he represented Hewitt, and Hewitt is the father to Harry. What is your take on that? Do you have any comment on that whole story that seems to go on and on and on?
You know, the Hewitt, Harry, Diana story is one of those things that's been gathering moss and is a myth that's become fact. Hewitt was after Harry was born. End of.
But in the interview I did with Max, he insists it absolutely wasn't. From your perspective and from your knowledge, that was the case, that did not happen until after Harry was born.
Well, if you believe Max Clifford, you believe anything, and he wouldn't be where he is now, would he?
Very, very good point. Dickie Arbiter's new book is out now. It is fascinating, not only the life you led in the public eye as the press officer for Her Majesty, but before and after. Your life now, is it thrilling to be sat here talking to idiots like me about your life and to always be referred to? You're the go-to guy around the world, aren't you, when it comes to royal issues?
Well, I'd like to think I'm the go-to guy, but please don't be self-deprecating. You know, you're doing a job. This is a terrible British habit, being self-deprecating. Come on, you've got to say, I'm great, I'm good at what I'm doing, because if you weren't, you wouldn't be doing it.
Well, I'm not bad, but it's not like working for a living talking, is it? Everybody else can do it.
Well, I'm enjoying life. People say, well, you're enjoying retirement, enjoying holiday. I've been on holiday since I was born. It's just that I happen to be working in between. No, I'm enjoying myself, and life is all about enjoying yourself. We're not a long time here, and we're a long time dead, so make the most of it while we're here.
Very finally, are there another 100 books that could be written if you had the inclination about your 10 years within that royal family?
Ask me if there's a next time.
Dickie Arbiter, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.